well, we have science. Now we have no need for religion or God or any of these other
Okay.
beliefs that were used because we didn't have science. And
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah. That, you see, the problem with that argument is it has nothing to do with Christianity. That's an
Mhm.
argument that is all related to the ancient type of religion, so to speak,
The myths.
the myths, which covered everything. It covered the natural world and it covered everything else. So,
Yes.
thunder. Okay, thunder is caused by demons or gods bowling or whatever. Lightning is Thor throwing. So, that hasn't been part of religion for 2,000 years. I mean, I don't know why this argument is still used. It's nonsense.
Hmm.
Yeah, we don't. If you say we have science, so we don't need God. So my simple question is, do you love your husband or wife? Why?
Mm.
Can science tell you why? And don't tell me it's hormones and that's science of the gaps. That's
Mm.
not hormones. That doesn't explain why you love anything or anybody. So
Hmm.
I mean, it's part of the process of
Hmm.
expressing love, perhaps, but it's not why.
Mm.
So, yes, we need God to explain why we have morals, why we think there's good and evil, why we love, why we don't love. We need God to explain so much of our lives that science cannot even touch and is not supposed to touch. I mean, even my father, who was as strict about atheist as you could get,
Mm.
and was also a chemist, he was a scientist.
Uh-huh.
And he said to me, science cannot deal with everything. He was not a scientismist. He didn't believe in scientism. And this
Mm.
idea that we don't need anything once we have science, that's just a ridiculous philosophy that you can disprove in a minute.
Mm.
All you have to say is, I once asked one of these people, okay, so what about art? How
Mhm.
can you tell whether a piece of art is good or not? How does
Mhm.
science come into that? And he said, oh,
Right.
it's very easy. Just find out what the price is of the art. If it's higher, it's better. If it's lower, it's not. And he was serious. That's a scientific, quantifiable answer. And of course, complete nonsense.
Mhm. Yeah, it's interesting how well people will go to the biochemistry that's happening in your brain and the
Mhm.
hormones and the dopamine releases that are happening,
Right.
but then when you point out that well the same thing happens when I have a Kit Kat bar, so is
Yeah.
that love as well, right?
Yeah, that's right. And,
um
and
uh,
that's a mechanism. That's not an answer. That's not a
ah,
that's not a cause. That's a mechanism. And we know there are mechanisms for everything.
right, so what they're spouting is the mechanism, not the
Right.
answer to that, and it is a
Part of the mechanism. Part of it.
right, right. Wow. Okay, that's a good one. And what about for someone who would say, well, okay, we're talking about evidence now. What they don't say, there's no proof of God, or that God didn't, science didn't prove God wrong. But what if they say something like, well, there's zero evidence for God,
Yeah.
or there's weak evidence for God?
Okay, well, the zero evidence is, I mean, that's what Aaron Ra has said. That's what Matt
Yes.
Hunty says, and many other
And
people.
you've debated them as well in the
I did,
past. And
well, I didn't debate Dillahunty. I don't
oh,
want to get into that. Dillahunty's
mhm,
another story. But anyway,
mhm,
but yeah, I had a very good conversation with Aaron Ra about
mhm,
that, where I told him, I'm not sure you're really using evidence in the right way.
mhm,
And there's a huge amount of evidence for God.
mhm,
And that includes from all the sciences, the fine tuning of the constants, the cosmological constants,
yeah,
is evidence for God. It
mhm,
doesn't prove God. There are one or two other possible explanations which are not any better than God,
mhm,
the God explanation. But yeah, it doesn't prove it, but it's strong evidence. That's one. The other, I believe, is the origin of life, which is, I think, again, is not proof, because there
mhm,
may be a scientific explanation for the origin of life. We have no idea what it is, but there could be one. I don't rule that out. But I think that if we do find one, it'll turn out to point to God, just as physics.
mhm.
So that's evidence, I think, for God. At the moment, I would say it is weak, but it can get stronger. Every time we rule out another alternative, it gets a little stronger.
Mm.
What else? Well, then is related to that is all the ways that life works, the existence of the genetic code. We don't know any way that the genetic code could evolve. And the reason for that is technical and has to do with the requirement for evolution to have very high reproductive accuracy, which I've discussed elsewhere, and it's too long to go into now. But there is strong evidence that the genetic code had to be created. The genetic code is the first example of meaning where something means something else in the universe. If you think about it, rocks, volcanoes, earthquakes, hurricanes, the weather in general, the sun, the planets, gravity, they don't have any meaning. They just are. They're laws, which I believe came from God, but any way you want to think where they came from, they're laws of science, they're natural laws, things that happen, but they don't have any meaning. The genetic code means something, and that was required for life because life is full of meaning. It's full of purpose. It's full of agency. And all of this I discuss in great detail in my upcoming book, which will come out in August, called Beyond Evolution. New discoveries in the science of life point to God. And, that's strong evidence for God. The fact that there is code. all the codes we know come from a coder. And,
Right.
So there's plenty of evidence and many other things. I at some point I've made a list. But to say there's zero evidence or only very weak evidence is simply wrong. It's just not.